Hi, everybody. Welcome to Halodata Vendor Hard Talk. My name is Resham Gaglani, CEO of Halodata, and today we have two very special guests from Netwrix here with us today. So let me introduce first Terry Burgess, Vice President, Asia Pacific Japan at Netwrix, and Martin Cannard, VP Product Strategy, also known as father of the JIT PAM. So I'm not going to do justice to introduce you guys. So maybe we can start with you, Martin. Please give a good introduction of yourself.
Yeah, good to be here. So so Martin Cannard. I've been in the PAM space for about 2 decades, and started years ago with my own company, which I sold to Novell. Worked very often through Quest. Quest had a very early entrance in the space, called TPAM. And migrated my way across to Beyond Trust. With Beyond Trust, I created the privileged account product there, and now Stealth Bits and Netwrix. So a peppered history, but all around PAM.
No wonder they call you the father of PAM in that sense. Terry, what about yourself?
Yeah, look, I've been very fortunate. I've worked for some leading software vendors in the market, always with regional roles. So from my early days with HSBC to Attachmate and virtualization technologies, cloud technologies, and then into cybersecurity with identity and data governance products.
Great. So Martin, with over almost 20 to 30 years of experience in the privilege management and security space, what are the pivotal moments in your career that led you to maybe your current role at Netwrix?
I would say that the biggest items that happened was really being a user and a consumer of the technology. Right. Before I went into IT security as a career, I was actually an administration manager, right, at a big IT operation in the UK. And, that taught me a lot in terms of, the application of the technology, the implementation, and also just really, some of the nuances about how people are trying to deal with, security products and the complexities.
Right. So in this period, you've seen a full evolution of PAM in general. Now, having witnessed this, how have you seen the landscape change? And what do you think the most significant advances or changes, like pivotal moments, like PAM has evolved in the last, in your entire experience?
Yeah, I mean, so PAM really was very, very simple years ago. I mean, it was all around, just dealing with, rotating accounts, storing them in vaults. It's evolved over the years, where we've, gone from, just basic account storage to, doing sessions, to be able to do video recording. But the biggest impacts really has just been the absolute plethora of all of the different types of environments that PAM's involved in. Years ago, it was simple operating systems. You had Windows, you had Linux, maybe mainframe, a couple of other, maybe some databases. But now it's become very, very much more broad in terms of its application, especially when you start looking at cloud. AI, as we know, is going to be very big in this space. I mean, not just in terms of the use cases that our customers have, but also in its application to be able to weed through lots and lots of data. So as we know, any security system collects masses of data. And one of the biggest challenges trying to go through and looking through the weeds. And so I think AI is going to have a really big impact in actually bringing people a lot closer to, what they need to do in order to be able to address their issues without, dealing with false positives.
That's great. So that leads me up to my next question. So today in your role at Netwrix, you are the VP of Product Strategy and primarily in the PAM and related technology space. So what would you say is your primary responsibility, and how do you think, Netwrix is a large organization with different solutions in different market segments. But how does your role as a VP of Product Strategy align with Netwrix missions and goals?
Yeah, so I'm actually part of a cross-functional team that looks at all different areas. So Netwrix isn't just a PAM company, it's not just an identity company, it's not just a DSPM company. We work across all of those areas, and that's really part of its differentiator. Because when you look at a lot of different types of solutions that are out there, Very often you might be, for example, very, very focused on PAM and, you're going to pull in ITDR or maybe, it's IGA. But the differences with Netwrix is that we're strong in all of those areas. So if this was a restaurant, we're not talking about like an entree with a set of side dishes. We have a lot of different entrees, so we are a surf and turf, if you like, in terms of, sort of restaurants. Right. So it makes a big impact. So my role really is, very focused on PAM, but as part of that very sort of broad cross-functional team that deals with all of these areas and their integration.
Right. Excellent. Last week, yourself and Terry were in Sydney for a Gartner conference. So my question on Gartner is, what's the approach to PAM? Netwrix has been identified as many different, visionaries and many different locations in the Magic Quadrant. What do you believe, going deep diving into Netwrix PAM solution, sets it apart in general, without being very detailed enough from its peers in industry?
Yep. I would say the biggest thing really is its simplicity in the way that it deals with problems. So, I think over the years, when we look at everything's got a word management in it. And management is great because it's a way of containing a problem. But what we've been very focused on is removing the problem. Because if you remove the problem, it doesn't exist anymore. There's nothing to manage. It's a much better way to deal with it. And so what we've done is we've applied this approach in every aspect of what we do. So whether it's identities, where we're dealing with orchestration, whether it's privilege, we orchestrate those, and even things on the endpoints. I mean, if we're dealing with things like, RDP, the ransomware distribution protocol, normally left switched on, all the time. And so it's an attack surface. Again, that could be removed when it's not being used. So instead of managing it, we remove the problem. That's really our key mantra, across really the entire breadth of the solution.
Perfect. Now let me bring Terry back to the conversation. So Terry, where do you believe is Netwrix's overall strategy for this region? Given that you have, Netwrix has a large portfolio and different target markets, how do you think, Netwrix is going to expand its portfolio in Asia, and with you now, the VP of APJ?
Yeah, thanks, Resham. Look, I'm really excited to be on board in Netwrix, and cultural sensitivity is one of those areas that means a lot to me. And Netwrix has that already. So there's a lot of great people in different parts of the world, and we've played with our strengths. And that's kind of my philosophy too with the region here. Cultural sensitivity to me means if we're expanding and enhancing a region, then it's people from that region will help us grow. So we're respectful to the customers, the partners, yourselves, etc., when we grow that. But there's some great purple patches, I call it, in Asia Pacific, which we will enhance this year.
Okay. And I'm sure, as we've discussed before, Netwrix is looking for a channel first kind of strategy.
Oh, spot
Maybe you
on.
want to elaborate a bit more about that?
Yeah, spot on. And so that's the other really great aspect from Netwrix is its channel first policy. And there's no exceptions. Okay, right. We sell through the channel. That's our go to market. And I'm pretty excited about that. That's the best way to scale the business.
Great. Back to you, Martin. We've heard probably in the Gartner conference and everywhere else, people talking about PAM in the same space as zero standing privileges. Now, as the father of JIT, or as Netwrix itself advocates a zero standing privilege approach, can you explain to the layman what ZSP is and why it's important in the identity space or the privilege access space?
Yeah, so starting with really why it's important is if we think about a typical attack scenario, so lateral movement.
Right.
So lateral movement is where one device component in your environment gets compromised, and then an attacker, whether that's a person, piece of malware, will then use different attack techniques in order to be able to move from system to system. So it's very much an opportunistic attack. But what it does is it uses privilege to be able to move around. So think of privilege as a vehicle. So when we take away the privileges from the environment when they're not in use, we're essentially taking away the vehicle. So what that's doing is it's actually stopping those accounts from being able to propagate. So it's not going to stop, an individual system from getting compromised, but what it does do is it stops a spread. And that's really the key aspect of what we're doing. It's being able to make sure that we're able to, have a solution that allows you to be able to, not only give users access when they need it, but also just to be able to make sure that the attack surface doesn't exist when they're not using it. So standing privilege is really just the term of an account in your environment that has privileges over time. Think about domain admin. You might have a user that logs onto, the systems maybe a few times a week, and they use that domain admin account, but the account has its privileges over time. So that's standing privilege. So think of zero standing privilege as a desired end state. That's where you want to be. Don't have any privileges that don't have to exist unless they're necessary.
So what you're basically saying is, if I have no privileges open, there's nothing that can be compromised in that sense.
Yep, you're removing the ability for malware to be able to move around. So it's just a great way of dealing with the problem. It's just removing it.
Great. So now, Halodata, myself, our partners, everyone talks about PAM as this big mega project that takes years and a lot of effort and a lot of time. And they don't want to switch to newer solutions because they're stuck, right? What do you think are some of the common challenges organizations face when implementing a PAM solution? And as Netwrix, how do you try to help customers overcome this? Is it by product, by services? What do you think?
It's a great question. So one of the biggest issues with PAM, whether you're implementing it for the first time or whether you're replacing an incumbent system, is the fact that it's, when you're dealing with managing accounts, it's all encompassing. So if you have an administrator account that maybe does, 30, 40 different things, for all sorts of different things, maybe it's accessing databases, endpoints, directories, then that means that PAM solution has to also to be able to deal with every single one of those use cases. Now, multiply that by the number of people that have administrative accounts. So what happens is you end up with these projects taking years, and very often, because they take years or, a large period of time, it means that then, inevitably you get distractions, so a customer, might be going in and said, yep, you know what, we've got 6 months, we focus to this project, but if it's overrunning, all of a sudden they're pulled onto something else. And so what you tend to find is PAM solutions that aren't implemented, fairly quickly, usually are, I'd say never implemented, but they take far longer to do. So you've got a far greater risk of them not being implemented fully. So what we do is we allow you to be able to implement ourselves alongside whatever process you have. So, let's say, for example, we'll take domain admins. Think of a domain admin attack surface. Someone compromises your domain admin account, they have access to everything generally in your environment because it's ubiquitous. So the key thing that, that we have is the ability to be able to say, you want domain admin access? We're going to create you an account. We're going to give it domain admin rights. As soon as you finish, we remove the account. Now that has no impact on anything that you're currently doing in your environment. So what that means is we're taking away the risk, because the last thing you want to do is kick off a project, spend, again, 6 months, a year, implementing it, and then all of a sudden, finding that, it's even not implemented or things are broken. So what we do is we allow you to be able to be laser focused on the gaps. What is it that you're not able to currently do? Pinpoint it and then give you a mechanism to be able to expand that easy.
Right. Now, Netwrix Privilege Secure, which is actually the Netwrix product, PAM product. One of the key points that we at Halodata see, it's ease of use. It's very easy to use. It's very easy to work with. Work with it. Administrators don't take a long cycle to get on board. Before I talk about integration, maybe Terry, you can just second me on this. In Asia, right? We have a large turnover of people. We've got people joining and leaving the organization quite often. Don't you agree with me that having a solution that's easy to deploy and easy to operate, configure, is an important part because of the high turnover of IT admins and stuff like that?
Yeah, it's a really interesting point, Resham. So definitely that ease of use is really important. And 5 years ago, it was education, okay, that you had to give customers, partners, et cetera, of those parts of the market in identity and privilege access management areas. But now it's a higher turnover of staff, and ease of use is really important. But it's up to us to listen to those pain points from a customer and just zero in on that. I think that's a real key skill, and it's really important for that ease of use mentality.
Exactly, which brings me to the integration part. Now, a lot of clients say, hey, I have an existing solution. I'm using a PAM solution. I don't need another PAM solution. But the question here then arises, why should I work with Netwrix? What kind of integration? And the conversation I had with you earlier this morning off the camera, we actually can work, Netwrix Privilege Secure actually works with anyone else who is already running PAM. Maybe you want to talk about integration and how that works.
Yeah. So when I first kicked off this project about 7 years ago, I created this concept called BYOV, Bring Your Own Vault.
Right.
And that's the notion that ultimately it doesn't matter where your credentials are stored. It can be in our vault. We have a vault, we can manage them. But oftentimes, as I said, the biggest risk factor when you are implementing PAM is changing vaults.
Right.
Because as I said, as soon as you take things out of one system and move it to another, now you're introducing risk. You've got regression testing, especially when it comes to things like APIs and embedded applications, non-human identities, ultimately, that's a lot of refactoring, of code. So the notion of BYOV was to be able to say, you know what? I mean, you can actually just keep it in the existing vault. So we'll just check it out, as part of the process. So, when you go to start it, we'll check out an account from your incumbent PAM solution. You can now add and remove the privileges. You can now turn RDP off. You can do dynamic shares, all of the things that we can do. And then we'll just simply check it back in again afterwards. And also the other cool thing is we can do session management. So let's say, for example, if your incumbent PAM solution is expensive to run, let's say, for example, you need Microsoft Cows in order to be able to do session management, you don't have that cost, because now all of a sudden, we're just using the vault element of that solution, and all you're doing now is actually just overlaying our solution on top of it.
So it's like this Lego kind of block that you can put on, even if you have some PAM running in today because of the JIT access and stuff like that.
Yeah, and really any type of vault. So it doesn't matter whether it's Azure Vault. I mean, anything with an API. That's the other thing we've done is we've made it extensible, so you can write your own connectors. It's very, very easy to be able to integrate with anything, any entity that you want to be able to pull a credential from.
I think a lot of clients will like the fact that you can write your own connectors, because there are a lot of things that maybe are not available out of the box for anyone, because it's a custom built solution, it's a government sensitive solution, not publicly available. So if you can write your own connectors, I think it's fantastic. Now, I've read your blogs online, and you talk a lot about zero trust, right? And you've written about the zero trust security model. Now, from that perspective, how does PAM fit into that zero trust framework? And any of our clients listening to him today who are talking about, approaching everything with a zero trust concept, what are the best practices you would recommend to them?
So, I mean, with zero trust, as we know, I mean, it's the whole trust no one model. We've, the sort of low hanging fruit, for zero trust has always been MFA and adding that on there. But what we're able to do is we're also able to layer on any other type of authentication. So it doesn't matter whether you're using smart cards, the MFA can be integrated with our solution. It's really, when it comes to zero trust, it's making sure that you are not just removing access from those people, ultimately when it's not being used, because again, you can't really trust anybody or any entity, but it's also making sure that by ensuring that it doesn't exist, also gives you, another side of the equation, because now all of a sudden you're not just dealing with, a person getting access. There's nothing for them to access. You're actually removing that bit that typically you're trying to adjust in a zero trust environment. So So in some respects, I mean, the bottom line is, it's not just about sort of getting a user access to an endpoint. Zero trust is about being able to add that context about what they're doing, how they're doing it, what they're using it for, and not just giving them access to privilege, but giving them access to just enough privilege. Sometimes we call it JIT and JEP, just in time, just enough privilege. It's making sure that you're narrowing it down, over time.
You just created a new acronym, JEP.
JIT and JEP,
Right.
There you go.
So everything you've said so far, lateral attack moves, attackers, a lot of it, people deem this as an external threat. But primarily when PAM was created in the original days, and even today, I think it's very relevant, we have the insider threat, right? And in a larger global context, global organizations, work from home, all these has increased the landscape for insider threats to occur. Now, how effective is PAM in mitigating the risks associated with insider threats?
So insider threats, I mean, what we allow you to be able to do is, I'll give you a couple of examples. So, as part of the solution, let's say, you finished, with a session. As we know, one of the biggest attack surfaces is token reuse, so Kerberos tokens. So what we can do is we can remove those from the endpoint. So in other words, tidy up once we finish. We can also remove those tokens even before a user starts a session. So in other words, there's nothing for them to compromise. Right. But the other key aspect, especially when we're looking at insider threats, and as you mentioned, people working from home, is thinking about, how we've been using VPNs for years to be able to reach out to endpoints. So, one of the last bastions that's really helped making us hang on to VPNs has been access to infrastructure. We put our email in the cloud, we put our file sharing in the cloud, but infrastructure has always been that last mile that's made it difficult to get rid of VPNs. And the issue with that is, let's say, for example, you've got your laptop open, it's on the kitchen table, you're busy working. If you step out, somebody comes in, maybe there's some sort of targeted account, they know who you work for, they know your address, somebody goes in and actually slips some malware on your computer. Now, all of a sudden, you're actually opening up an attack surface to the inside. So the other thing that's also important is secure remote access. Mm-hmm. So that's actually VPN-less access. And that's something that we provide as part of the solution to be able to make sure that we allow you to be able to remove that very last bit that's, ultimately could actually help, make you compromise your environment through use of company equipment at home.
Sure. And I like the fact you talk about kitchen table. So when you talk about working from home and kitchen table, everything is about, how good it is for the end user to work from home and a good user experience and security. So balancing user experience with strict security measures like PAM can be challenging. I think, as a security vendor, security distributor, it's always the biggest challenge what the end user will feel like. So how does Netwrix ensure that its PAM solutions are both secure yet user-friendly?
Yeah, when there's two sides to it. So there's the using the product as an end user and setting up the product as a system administrator. Right. So one of the key issues I think over the years is we focus too much on use cases, where we said, our product needs to be able to do these particular critical capabilities. Now, what happens is then you end up with these convoluted workflows. So let's say, for example, I need to set up a system. And then all of a sudden I say, I need to have a service account. So now all of a sudden I've got to come out of that screen I'm in. I've got to go into somewhere else, set it up, then I got to go back in. Now, what we've done is we use what I call my McDonald's kitchen approach, whereas we have everything around us. That was really success at McDonald's when Ray Kroc invented that process, which was to be able to make sure that whatever you did was close at hand. So another good example is service account management. Right. So I've seen many instances where, for example, administrators won't rotate their service accounts simply because of the risks involved. Because if something goes wrong, now all of a sudden you've got maybe half your systems changed, half your systems are not changed. Now you've got to manually go in. You've got to reset all of those different credentials on the endpoints. You got to restart the services. It could take you hours to do. So what we do is we have everything in place to be able to make sure that we deal with any problem you're likely to come up. So if you get an issue, you hit the rollback button, undoes the changes, you fix the issue, then you try again. So the approach is key. Now, moving to the user side of the house, if we think of end users, human beings by nature want to do things simply. Nobody wants a PAM solution. The famous quote is, nobody puts in a PAM solution because they want to. They put in a PAM solution because they're told to. And very often with end users, they just want to be able to do their jobs. So what we've done is we thought very carefully about the workflow. How can we integrate in with how users currently do it? So we have something called Direct Connect. So rather than having to go to a UI and do something completely different, if you're a DBA, well, you just launch the tool you need. You launch SSMS, you choose the database, through the workflow, and it logs you straight in. So it's about reducing that operator friction, because if operators aren't fully on board with it, that's when you get, failures with PAM, or you get the extended rollouts because people are going to get pushed back.
Right. So back to Terry on this. Terry, you've been in Asia for quite a bit. So how different do you think the end users in Asia, based on your demands, are compared with maybe say in the States or UK or Europe? We're interesting bunch of people.
Go to Martin, not to me, but look, it's interesting because I think cloud adoption is one of those areas that's still growing in Asia. But I kind of challenge it a little bit with all customers, no matter where they are in the world, want value, right? So I think that's really important. There's different maturity levels in different markets in Asia, which has to be taken into account. But on the end of the day, I really think that customers want on-premise in certain parts of Asia because there's still a maturity level, there's still data sovereignty issues, all these sorts of things which are driving those reasons why they want on-premise. And I think that's important. We're fortunate, we've got both solutions, but I think that's a really big thing. The value too is like what I mentioned early on, is just listening intently to that customer about those pain points. And Martin said it earlier on, the coexistence approach. I really like that. Bring your own Vault, just-in-time administration accounts, those sorts of things. Just-in-time is a really key thing for coexistence.
Yes,
okay,
100%. So, that's a good point. And back to you, Martin. Your title says, Father of JIT PAM. So I don't think there's anyone better in industry to explain what real just-in-time means. Maybe you can define that.
It's so funny where, it's like when they say marketing versus the truth. A lot of people will jump on acronyms. And as we know, we live in an acronym-ridden society these days. And, people say, we got just in time. Now, the important thing to remember is every PAM solution that's ever been around is just in time, because I'm going to give you access to privilege at a point in time for a slice of time. I mean, that is just in time. The difference is what parts are just in time. So that's really the key element. So when vendors say, yep, okay, we have just in time, it's important to be able to find out, well, which parts do you actually mean? Are you just meaning just in time for the session? Or is it really just about, when we think about what we should be doing, about really trying to deal with the problem? Right. And it is a problem. I mean, it isn't just something where it's a nice to have. The problem is we have lateral movement. And as we know, it's not really if, unfortunately, it's probably when you're going to get attacked. So being able to, mitigate that, to be able to remove it, to do due diligence, that's really the key aspect of just in time.
Right. So you heard it first here from the father of just in time. But let's talk about, early on you mentioned about artificial intelligence, AI. I think Terry will agree with me. AI is the buzzword of any conference. What do you think the role of AI will be in PAM, and how do you see it evolving?
So there's two sides to AI. So there's AI in the context of, customers deploying AI, right. And then, how that affects IT departments, that are trying to, to scramble to get up and ready, to be able to deal with that side. And I think that itself is actually a challenge, because there's always the hype. Everybody's saying, right, I need AI. I don't know why, but I need to have AI. And that brings into, itself, a whole heap of different problems. When we actually start looking at data, the data transfer, where that's stored. Is it a local LLM? Are you storing it externally, ChatGPT or something? And we start. I think it's important to be able to kind of deal with some of those questions. So PAM is something that has to be able to support customers that are going through that journey. Now, on the PAM side, actually, in its use of AI, one of the biggest challenges has always been just the vast volume of data, that you've had to go through. Now, that could be just looking at your attack surface. Let's say you've got 20,000, endpoints, that you're dealing with. Now, being able to filter through to decide, okay, well, now I've enumerated group membership by direct membership in those groups or through group membership itself, nested group membership, being able to see where are the anomalies, where are the roles, for example, that maybe shouldn't exist. Those are the things that AI can really help us to be able to go in. So think of AI as more of an enabling tool that allows us to be able to deal with the drudgery and cutting through the data to be able to understand where are low-hanging fruit.
Right. So it'll be interesting to see where AI takes not only PAM, but the whole cybersecurity space. Now, from my perspective, today, Halodata has joined the Netwrix family, which I think among the three of us, you've been with long enough. We joined the Netwrix family with the acquisition of Endpoint Protector by Cosys. And it's been a great journey. We've been a distributor now for a year with Netwrix. It's been fantastic. A lot of things to learn because Netwrix has a wide portfolio and across many verticals. And I think the team has really enjoyed being part of the Netwrix family, I should say. So maybe first from you, Terry. What is Netwrix vision? I know you're only about 2 months, so I'm asking you first because if we miss some points, Martin will fill in. But you've got a new CEO, Grady Summers. So where do you think the Netwrix vision is for the next 5 years?
Yeah, that's another tough one, okay.
Yeah.
So, but look, I really think Martin touched on it before. Simplicity is a really key thing. So although we've got a large portfolio of solutions, simplicity is kind of dear to our heart. So making it easy for customers, partners to deploy our products is a real, something I just don't want to talk about. We've got some great examples of that out there. So simplicity is a key thing. Partner-centric, we mentioned before. So 100% selling through the partner ecosystem. And then there could be some consolidation where it makes sense. So a partner like yourself, playing with your strengths about this portfolio of products and technologies suits you, that consolidation will be a key area too that we'll work on.
Great. What about you, Martin? Probably more privy to the original vision and now a probably revised vision. Where do you think Netwrix is going for the next 5 years? In general, and maybe for PAM as well.
Yeah, I think that really think of it almost like as a best practice. I think for years, a lot of these different product areas have been siloed. So you've been, a PAM vendor, you've been an identity vendor, ITDR. We're seeing a lot more convergence, and so inevitably that means that now that there's a lot of confusion when people are going to go to the vendors and say, okay, well, yeah, we also have this other adjacent technology. And I think one of the things that we're doing at Netwrix is trying to move beyond, essentially a product.
Right.
Think of it as a set of capabilities, because the reason why a lot of vendors are consolidating is because there isn't just, a single silver bullet that you can just put in and say, yep, okay, one and done, and that's going to fix that area. Security is very, very broad in its reach. It's everything from the inception of of the user identity to their privileged identity to the environment's application security. There's a whole gamut of stuff in terms of a lifestyle and attack surface. So what we're trying to do in Netwrix is really trying to define down all of these individual capabilities. So as a customer, you're dealing with something which is going to be very much more shrink wrapped to what you're doing. Instead of saying, look, here's a product and you've got 100 different capabilities and you're going to use 10 of them for sake of argument. It's actually saying, well, here is the combination of all of those different type of capabilities that we have in our portfolio. How can we package that together that's going to work very specifically to you? And to Terry's point, making that simple. Because again, that's the thing. I think we've been missing the simplicity for years.
I mean, today I speak on behalf of Halodata, right? Halodata has now partnered Netwrix for a year now. This exclusive partnership has given us access to a lot of different specializations that Netwrix has. And one thing I saw in the Gartner conference that you guys started off with was the data security that starts with identity. And I think that's unique, but in my opinion, it also, the whole region, Terry, has been coming up with data privacy laws, cybersecurity laws. And there's a lot of drive towards compliance, right? Regulatory compliance, more in-country compliance, data residency compliance. And all of this has converged a lot of technologies. And I think personally, and on behalf of the team at Halodata, we find that Netwrix has chosen in advance with its acquisitions the right set of technologies and is bringing it together. And I think what we at Halodata are excited to work with Netwrix is to go on this journey where this convergence happens and the ability to offer our end users and our partners a single entity, right, which can deal with complex security issues, but not with a one product approach fits all, but a particular, this approach or this product set, these capabilities, as you mentioned, can deal with certain problems, because not every client will have the same challenges. We may overarch them and say, it's privilege accessible. But some of it may be sitting on top of an existing solution. Some of it may be not about accounts, but privileges. So I think where we're excited and to bring Netwrix to market is the ability to orchestrate this in the entire industry with the partner ecosystem that we have, because not every partner is going to focus on everything, but we've got everything for every partner. That's the way at Halodata we're approaching Netwrix strategies. We've probably got something for a problem you may have, you may not know you have, but definitely relevant to the data security space or the identity space. So on that topic, we've seen, as this market grow in Southeast Asia, a lot of hype on cybersecurity, a lot of young people entering cybersecurity. From a technical piece, don't mind me, Terry, asking Martin from a technical angle, right? Because I think the business side of it is the same across verticals, but from a technical side of it, what advice would you give to individuals who are aspiring to build a career in cybersecurity? Maybe, as deep as people in the PAM space, making PAM a subject of research, a subject of specialization. What would your advice be?
So that the key thing, I think, is to make sure you get a good grounding on the basics. Right. The bit that's always missing, I think, sometimes is it's almost like what I would call like common sense, which may be obvious to a lot of people, but sometimes, those things we tend to overcomplicate, our solutions. We try to make them, a little bit more elegant, than they should be, which again, that's the interesting stuff. AI is really interesting, and a lot of these different, areas that we're getting into. But I think within cybersecurity, it's understanding the basics. But the other interesting thing, which I think is absolutely critical, which is maybe an odd thing to point out, is human nature. It's actually understanding the psychology of people, because you can implement any type of cybersecurity solution, but you're dealing with people. People have to use that technology. Now, again, machine to machine, you're not necessarily into the same sort of issue, but invariably, and for many, many years to come, you're still going to be dealing with people that are actually using it. So I think, sometimes actually coming from a background of, being a user, being someone as from IT, somebody in implementation services. You're installing these products, so certainly it's great to be able to understand. Anybody can learn all of the different acronyms that are out there, but I think getting an interest in that side, because that's where it becomes fascinating. Because cybersecurity is, it's like a game of chess. I mean, you are always trying to, put yourself one move ahead of an attackers. They're always, getting more complicated. Again, I'll use AI as an example there. If we think about, how people are using AI to do these deepfake, type of emails. Years ago, let's say, for example, we'll take certain regions like Japan. It might have been very difficult for somebody to craft a very genuine looking phishing email, for that market. But now there's technologies that make that so much easier. And so that's part of the challenge is, it's always, you're trying to sort of predict, what the bad guys are doing, how they're leveraging sometimes the same technology that you're using for good. And that's, as I say, that's why I love the space. It's a fascinating space, and it's something which is always evolving.
It's interesting you say that, because just a few days ago, the Singapore Prime Minister had to go on record and say, look, there are a lot of deep fakes of me selling, these solutions, properties, bitcoins. It's got nothing to do with me. And it's whether it's AI for bad and AI for good, right? And that's it. And then we have, as a national strategy across Southeast Asia, many companies investing, or many governments investing in individuals to go and learn AI. So it's good and bad. I totally agree with you. Now, in this, to end the session today, where, you guys have been in security for long enough. You guys have accomplished a lot to reach where you are today. What motivates you, and I'll start with Cherry, to be in the cybersecurity space?
I won't say it's that good versus evil. That's too cliched. But look, definitely, I just think it's a natural evolution of what I did before, right? I like what you mentioned, that those swim lanes are certainly blurred from some vendors. So there's a bit of the purity of Netwrix, which I really like too, where we concentrate on the core values. But I really think me being in cybersecurity has been that evolution. But to answer your question too, that you framed with the youth of today and where they should be going, to me, identity and data go hand in hand. Yes. And it's a great industry for young people to get into. AI is kind of the hot buzzword, as Martin said before, but there has to be that identity and data-centric workforce. Otherwise, it's a challenging situation out there.
It's the base that we start off. What about you, Martin?
So I think the big thing that actually, sort of makes me get up in the morning, gets me really excited about cybersecurity is just, it's that ability to be able to make change. It's never going to be done. It's never finished. It's not like, where you think, yeah, what, we've pretty well locked it down and accomplished everything, because it's always evolving. There's always new platforms. There's new attack paths. It's, as I say, it is just, an ever evolving type of world, which makes it interesting. But, it's even sometimes, I mean, we think about PAM. I mean, it was the way that it was for, a good 17, 18 years, and no difference. And, all we did was just come along and do something that actually seemed sort of fairly basic, which was, let's remove it. Now, it's not to say that there aren't other things that could be done like that. And that's what I enjoy, is actually looking at problems, looking to find, is there a simpler way of dealing with it? Can we just kind of cut through a lot of the hype, the marketing, and just get back to basics, which is, I think, some of the things that's what I love. That's the bit that keeps me going, is that ability to make it better.
No, when you talk about basics in this, you talk a lot of things about common sense. In Singapore and Asia, we have this saying, very crude saying, common sense is not so common anymore, So, yeah, on that note, I think it's been a great chat with you guys. I think we've learned a lot more about PAM, a lot more about Netwrix and Netwrix PAM in general. I should say Netwrix Privileged Secure, but yes. But in general, I think this journey that we're embarking on with Netwrix is just the beginning of something big, something exciting. And we look forward to bringing you guys back and working with you guys closely to bring the Netwrix product portfolio to the industry. So, guys, thank you very much for joining us at Halodata Vendor Hard Talk. It's been a tough one, but I think it's exciting, and we wish you guys all the best and
Thanks,
a great
Resham.
partnership.
Yeah, thanks for having
I'm
us.
looking forward to
Thank
working
you.
with you.
Cheers.
Thanks.
And that's it from us from Halodata Vendor Hard Talk, and we look for you at the next episode where we might have a very special guest from Netwrix. See you later.